since the newly elected President Donald Trump in 2024 seriously revived the American desire to take possession of the vast land of Greenland. The United States of America and Europe are facing to this day the most important territorial dispute they have experienced in a long time.
We don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen, but for one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
This is Reynaldo Carrillo Vilches. Welcome to the New Encyclopedia. Join our Patreon for exclusive content and seminars. The truth is that Donald Trump's expansionist desire for Greenland is not a recent idea invented by him, but rather a controversy that is more than a century and a half old. First, we need to know that Greenland is a huge island at the northernmost part of the planet, located to the northeast of North America, with more than 2 million square kilometers. It is what is called a constituent nation of the Kingdom of Denmark, and with only 76,000 inhabitants, it holds an immense amount of resources. But above all, it has the potential for a variety of resources in areas like rare earths, with all kinds of minerals, oil, gas, and also the largest reserve of fresh water on the planet, among other mysteries yet to be discovered. By 1867, during the great territorial expansion of the United States of America, that nation bought the territory we know as Alaska from the Russian Empire. But also, that same year, the State Department drafted a report that reflected a latent and explicit interest in acquiring Greenland, which was expressed in the following terms. I quote, "Should we," the report says, "buy Iceland and Greenland, especially the latter? The reasons are political and commercial." End quote. After these events, the debate about Greenland would appear and disappear, depending on the time period and the political interest groups involved in the issue. Between 1888 and 1892, the American explorer Robert Peary led an expedition that reached the north of Greenland to claim that island for the United States. However, the United States government did not support or endorse this expedition. Later, in 1917, the United States acquired what was then called the Danish West Indies, which we all know today as the United States Virgin Islands, as part of the treaty, agreement, and deal. The United States agreed to recognize the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark over the territory of Greenland, an island that had already been governed by the Kingdom of Denmark for 200 years. That's a topic we'll talk about later. After this, with the start of the Cold War by 1946, President Harry Truman from the United States offered Denmark $100 million in gold to buy the island of Greenland. Denmark rejects the proposal, but is forced to allow the presence of the United States military. In 1951, the so-called Greenland Defense Agreement of indefinite duration was signed, under which the United States built and installed the Thule Air Base in Greenland, today called Pitufik Space Base, with the public and official argument at that time of intercepting possible military movements by the Soviet Union. In this way, with this agreement and with this military base, the United States obtained the right to move freely within the so-called defense zones of Greenland, gaining significant influence there. With this new order of things, in which the United States became the world's leading power from 1951 until 2009, the United States' intention to acquire Greenland had diminished, largely thanks to the existence of this base and to military, economic, and diplomatic cooperation. But after this long period of peace, on August 16, 2019, news broke that the United States President Donald Trump had asked the White House lawyer to study the possibility of the United States buying Greenland. And then the news gained more traction when Trump declared, I quote, essentially, this is a great real estate deal. A lot of things could be considered, end quote. Making reference once again in a very explicit way to the desire to buy Greenland and place it under United States sovereignty. The issue became much more internationally known and more viral during those same days, at a time when certain formalities were still observed. On social media, the American president posts a satirical image edited with a giant golden Trump tower on Greenlandic soil among humble houses, writing that I promise I will never do this to Greenland. In response, the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who is still in office, calls the American ambition in those statements absurd. And she says, I quote, Greenland is not for sale. Greenland is not Danish. Greenland is Greenlandic, end quote.
Greenland is today a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It is a part of our territory, and it's not for sale. The president, the leader of Greenland, has been very clear that it's not for sale.
Donald Trump replied saying that those were nasty statements and canceled a planned official trip to Denmark. Although after this, it seems that this little disagreement comes to an end, and the issue of Greenland is once again forgotten. However, in December 2024, a reinvigorated Donald Trump, recently re-elected for the presidential term until 2029, brings up the Greenland issue again, making a post on the social network Truth, where he writes, quote, the ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity, end quote. And then he appoints Silicon Valley businessman Ken Howry as the United States ambassador to Denmark. The reaction, of course, is immediate, and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen expresses words very similar to those she used 6 years ago. I quote, Greenland is not for sale under any circumstances. However, at the same time, local Greenlandic representatives give a more ambiguous message and say, I quote, we are open to negotiation, not to sale. And to truly understand this conflict, the first thing to ask is, what is the special fixation with Greenland? What is the history and reality of this island? Regarding its sovereignty, its population, and its ownership, what does each side claim to defend its position? Greenland, as we said, is an island of 2.16 million square kilometers, of which 80% is covered by a permanent ice sheet that can be up to 3 kilometers thick. Winter temperatures can reach as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius, and in summer they reach about 15 degrees. For this reason, it has a small population of 56,000 people who mainly settle on the west coast, where the climate is less cold. Greenland, according to evidence, has been inhabited by the Inuit for 4,000 years. Now, since the year 982 AD until the 15th century, Greenland was ruled by the Viking kings of Norway, who after some time mysteriously abandoned the island, leaving it isolated from the world until in 1720 the Danes planted their flag. When the missionary Hans Egede arrived on this island in search of traces of the ancient Vikings. And during his stay, he decided to found the town of Nuuk, which is now the island's capital. For the next 200 years, Denmark managed and governed the territory of Greenland, treating it as a closed colony, gradually populating it and introducing Protestant Christianity, and they reserved the exclusive right to trade with the island, mainly exporting sealskins, whale blubber, and fish. Thus, it was a province colony that was administratively and politically accountable directly to the Kingdom of Denmark. Then, in 1933, Norway tried to claim the eastern part of Greenland. But the International Court of Justice at that time dismissed the claim, and it ratifies the sovereignty of the Danes over the entirety of the Greenlandic island, By 1953, Greenland went from being a colony to officially becoming a district, and as a district of the kingdom. Now they had representation in the Danish parliament. However, the dynamism that the island had now acquired due to the American military and diplomatic presence and a considerable increase in its foreign trade, they led to the so-called Autonomy Act being enacted in 1979. This law in Denmark created a system of local self-government through a parliament to which responsibilities such as education, health, and taxes were transferred. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Denmark continued to maintain control over areas such as defense and Greenland's foreign policy. 30 years later, this autonomy law was replaced in 2009 by the Self-Government Act, a law that recognized Greenlanders as a distinct people in accordance with international law. And the Greenland Parliament was granted new powers and authorities, such as the administration of natural resources, courts, police, and penitentiaries. From then on, Denmark would only retain control over defense, foreign policy, and monetary matters in that area, which would continue to use the Danish currency, the Danish krone. In fact, this new law granted Greenland the authority to declare its independence if its people requested it through a referendum. Although it may seem at first that they have everything needed to be independent, the Greenlanders have decided to remain part of Denmark, according to some, for two main reasons. The first is economic. Greenland receives annual subsidies from Denmark of more than $600 million, which is almost half of its budget, and 20% of the island's gross domestic product. Without that key government support and without those subsidies, the island would face new significant burdens and new problems, which by law would also be the responsibility of that self-government to solve. And in addition to this, Denmark's membership in the European Union. This has provided the special case with significant commercial aid in the Eurozone. Due to its unique position, it has benefited from trading and receiving goods and services from the large European market. And it's very important to point out in this sense that even though the extraction of natural resources as an economic activity on the island is modest, Greenland holds great potential in the so-called rare earth sectors, with minerals such as neodymium, gold, iron, lead, and uranium, in addition to holding approximately 31 billion barrels of oil and gas trapped in the ice, and especially containing large amounts of fresh water, since Greenland's glaciers represent the largest reserve of fresh water on the planet. And the second reason for American interest in this land is military. If economically, life in Greenland would be much more complicated without Denmark, then military defense would be an even bigger issue, since they don't have their own army. Greenland depends entirely on the Danish armed forces, of which, it should be said, there are about 200 troops deployed throughout Greenland. One advantage that Greenland would have in its favor is its membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO. So, in theory, Greenland enjoys mutual defense from the other member countries of that treaty, in case there is an act of aggression. Though both complex and unique, like the territory itself, Greenlandic self-government and the Kingdom of Denmark have exercised and still exercise real and effective sovereignty over Greenland. This situation of the island as an autonomous territory, or at least partially autonomous, has remained, as we said, since the order established after World War II. But now, with Donald Trump returning to the White House, things have become unsettled again. Became United States President on January 20, 2025. Donald Trump, who in his second term has shown a much more patriotic and assertive discourse about the United States. As the world's leading superpower, he is intensifying his media campaign around the issue of Greenland. The United States' intentions revolve around three fundamental arguments: national security and mutual economic benefit. and the alleged inability of Denmark to ensure Greenland's security. In terms of national security, Donald Trump argues that it is necessary to ensure the United States' presence in that area to curb the influence of Russia and China, nations that have been slowly making their way into Greenland's economy. With the beneficial trade routes in the Arctic Ocean that have opened up thanks to the melting ice, China, for its part, has 4 mining projects in Greenland. And it has been strengthening the idea of the so-called Arctic Silk Road, a new trade route between Asia and Europe through the Arctic Ocean, of which Greenland owns a large area and where it is suspected that there is a large amount of natural resources that have not yet been quantified. And although Russia does not have a direct interest or direct presence in Greenland, it does play a key role in controlling the Arctic Ocean with its strong military presence in that area. A second argument that Donald Trump has put forward regarding this conflict is that he has admitted on several occasions that Greenland has trillions to make them rich, making an explicit reference to the natural resources and the great exploitation potential under United States control. In addition, what the territory of Greenland holds, which, according to Trump, would bring prosperity to both Greenlanders and Americans. Thirdly, Trump has argued that Denmark's alleged inability to manage and militarily defend Greenland poses a serious problem to be solved for both Denmark and NATO to counter, according to him, the military presence of Russia and China in the North Atlantic and the Western Hemisphere. That is why, in January 2025, Trump sends his son, Donald Trump Jr., to visit Greenland, being present there himself. Trump Jr. says it will be a fantastic place and that people would benefit greatly if and when it becomes part of our nation. This highlights the strong conviction of the United States that they wanted to formally annex Greenland. Later in March, Vice President J.D. Vance visits the United States military base in Greenland, and he does so without the authorization of the Greenlandic authorities. Therefore, Denmark has strongly rejected all these actions, and it has invoked Article 5 of NATO to warn about the dangers of a possible United States annexation. This article in question, Article 5, states that if a member country of the treaty is attacked, the other members must also consider themselves attacked. But this has also caused confusion among some experts, since as the United States is a member of NATO, the application of this article would be somewhat ambiguous in a military scenario. After 2025, it is at the end of the year that the topic is mentioned again by Donald Trump on December 22, 2025. Trump appoints Jeff Landry as special envoy to Greenland, but Landry is not recognized by Denmark as a diplomatic attaché, so it has so far been a purely nominal appointment. On January 4, 2026, after the military operation in Venezuela, an unprecedented operation that gave the United States a boost to its reputation regarding its military power and effectiveness. Donald Trump takes advantage of this to mention Greenland and says, "We need Greenland from a national security perspective." In the following days, Trump raises the tone a bit and says in a press conference phrases like, and I quote, "I don't need international law. We will take Greenland by force if they don't give it up. And a ship that arrived 500 years ago doesn't mean they own Greenland."
I'm a big fan, but the fact that they had a ship there 500 years ago doesn't mean they own it. There are destroyers in Greenland, there are destroyers and even bigger ones, so we're going to do something with Greenland, either the easy way or the hard way.
In response to all this, on January 14th, Denmark launches the so-called Arctic Endurance Operation. With help from France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, and Belgium, all members of NATO, in an operation that consisted of training exercises and reconnaissance missions in order to reaffirm Danish sovereignty over Greenland and send a message to the Americans. For this purpose, around 240 soldiers have been sent, along with several intelligence specialists and C-130 transport planes, Seahawk helicopters, snowmobiles, and speedboats have been mobilized. Experts say this mission is more symbolic than military. From a Europe that wants to send the message that it refuses to give in to the ambitions of the new Trump administration. After this, on January 15, J.D. Vance and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, meet with the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lars Rasmussen. The meeting ends without a clear resolution to the matter, and even Rasmussen says that there is a fundamental disagreement between both parties and that the United States does not seem willing to change its position or to negotiate paths toward mutual understanding. Finally, on January 17, according to analysts, to force an agreement for the acquisition of Greenland by the United States, Donald Trump announces that starting in February, he will impose a 10% tariff on all goods sent by the European Union to the United States, and that this would increase to 25% in July. And that same day, a letter from Donald Trump to the Prime Minister of Norway goes viral on social media, where he reproaches the country for not giving him the Nobel Peace Prize, commenting that, I quote, "I no longer feel an obligation to think only about peace," and adding, "The world is not safe unless we have complete and total control of Greenland," end quote. The next day, President Trump posted an image of an alleged private personal conversation between him and Macron, in which Macron told him he didn't understand what he was doing with the Greenland issue. And finally, in the midst of this escalation of tensions, on January 21, Donald Trump commented at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, also known as the Davos Forum, that the United States would not use military force in the Greenland matter, offering a public commitment that creates apparent calm about the situation, at least for the time being. So the ongoing conflict over Greenland doesn't seem to have a clear endpoint. While a peaceful agreement could be reached with Denmark, since Denmark is also a historic ally of the United States, recent events such as Venezuela's military operation, threats of intervention in Syria, bombings in Nigeria, among other phenomena, it will imply that the United States does not rule out the use of military force to satisfy its ambition on this particular issue. That is, to take control of the sovereignty of Greenland, an island that, amid Denmark's weakness in guaranteeing its effective sovereignty and its great strategic potential, is highly coveted. For the first time in its history, it finds itself in a global controversy that even threatens to put an end to more than 200 years of history as Danish territory. Thank you all very much for watching this video. I remind you that your support means a lot to us. By leaving your comments, giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This was Reynaldo José Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia. As always, we thank you for all your support and many blessings to everyone.